Welcome to another episode of the Tom Schimmer Podcast. Happy Monday, everyone. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. I am still on the road this week as I've made it back to North America after a wonderful, not quite a week in Europe, working with the American International School of Vienna. I absolutely love getting back to international work and international travel. To work hard, but to also be in a new and exciting place around the world is something I am truly grateful for. Seriously, it's the old European architecture, it's the food, it's the culture, it's the history, it's all of it. It's a part of my work that never gets old, and certainly one I will never take for granted. I also want to say, don't sleep on Turkish Airlines. Okay, that's the first time I've flown Turkish Airlines, and I found a really good fare with them. I did have to fly through Istanbul to get to Vienna, but I have to tell you, I was really impressed. It's funny, when I travel overseas, I feel like I turn into a 12-year-old kid. Just the wonderment of it all and traveling around the world. This week I'm in Arkansas working with Watson Elementary School here in Little Rock, and then I finished the week at Crossett High School in Crossett before finally heading home on Saturday. A reminder that Grading from the Inside Out 2-day training in Minneapolis, there's still time to register for that. That'll be December 1st and 2nd. Link in the show notes for that event if you want to check it out. So thanks for tuning in again this week. Big welcome, of course, to new listeners joining in for the first time, and a big thank you to longtime listeners. I appreciate each and every one of you. This week, my guest is Eric Saibel. Eric is a co-founder of something called Global School Play Day. So that is going to be the focus of our conversation this week. And in Assessment Corner, I'm going to explain what has me rethinking group grades and why. So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. My conversation with Eric Saibel is coming up, but first, don't at me. But I want to open this week by saying that when it comes to student engagement, or the lack thereof, we only have two choices. We either throw up our hands and give up, or we can do everything we can to create a more engaging experience for our learners. Now, for a while, whether it be in workshops or coaching sessions or whatever setting I'm in, I am continually hearing from teachers everywhere that there seems to be an increase in student apathy towards school. Now, I have no data to support that or data to dispute that, so I'm not going to discredit anything any teacher tells me about what they're experiencing. And I am empathetic to how hard it can be and how hard it feels when it appears as if students simply don't care. And so while student apathy is not a new phenomenon, what teachers are really telling me is that it's more. That more students than ever are displaying apathetic tendencies than they can remember. I think the easiest thing for us to do in those situations is to turn on the students and blame them by asserting that, they just don't care anymore. And I suppose that could be true for some students, but they're not a monolith. But that can't be true of all students or the majority, can it? When you step back for a moment and you think about the concept of school, it is on one level quite amazing that as many kids are as motivated and engaged as they are. Think about it. We force them to go to school every day. And then we put it on them to be engaged with what we're doing. Would that work for you? What if I forced you to become a heavy-duty mechanic? And then I told you it's on you to find your motivation and get engaged. I actually don't think that would work for most of us. So maybe as adults, we need to take a disproportionate amount of responsibility for student engagement. Like I said, we could just look at the students, the widespread apathy, and just throw up our hands and lament that kids today or post-COVID, and just blame the students and lament the state of our experiences. I have no confirmation that this issue is widespread, but if I'm just taking teachers at their word, I have to say I've heard it from teachers all over in a wide variety of places. So there has to be something to it. So we can just throw up our hands and give up, or we can try to gain some perspective and do everything we can to take us off the table as yet one more reason students disengage. Is it true that students are less engaged than they were pre-COVID? I have no idea. I don't know. But would it really be that surprising if they were or are? What did we expect? That we got back to school and students were just going to snap back into their February of 2020 dispositions with no residual effect? While COVID is still around, I think we can say that we can safely say that the pandemic is over or almost over or whatever. And look, don't at me and send me a message. Well, actually, Tom, technically, I don't, you know what I'm saying. We're past it by and large. COVID is still here. It's probably going to be around for a while. I got it. But life is definitely very different than it was in 2020 or 2021. Okay? So I don't need the 3-page dissertation about the technicalities of a pandemic. COVID has been, probably for everyone, a fairly traumatic event. And I think you could argue that maybe it's been more traumatic for adolescents and children for 2 reasons. First, they're not adults. They don't have adult brains. And they may not have the maturity and the perspective to process what's happened like adults do. And even some adults have struggled with it. Now, I know you can point out the exception to the rule, the adolescent who processes better than some adults. I know those exist. I get it. But generally speaking, the adults tend to have better perspective on things than adolescents do or children do. And second, for the most part, what happened in 2020 or 2021 was done to them with very little input from students or from young people. So is it possible that this widespread apathy is actually a very normal response to the trauma that was and maybe still is COVID? Instead of apathy, what if I said, based on what happened to them during COVID, students have become cynical and disillusioned with life? Kind of sounds different, doesn't it? Rather than calling them apathetic, like they don't care, what if we looked at them and said, the residual effect is they've become disillusioned with life? If I told you that a student was feeling hopeless and had become, like I said, disillusioned with the prospect of their future, would you just point the finger at them and assert that they are less than previous generations of students? What if the so-called apathy is that? What if they have simply lost their hopefulness about life? What if that youthful energy and optimism has been extinguished? Wouldn't we take the initial responsibility for reigniting that spark? I think we would. Now, to be clear, I don't know if that's why students are reacting the way they're reacting, but I suspect that it is. Too many teachers in too many places are saying the exact same thing. So either there was a coordination amongst teens, the likes of which we have never seen, or this is a much more primal kind of response and represents a natural physiological and maybe psychological reaction to what was a traumatic event during the pandemic. I know anger and frustration is not the answer. Is this what you would want? Imagine you've become disillusioned with the profession, and I'm sure several of you out there don't have to imagine, as maybe you are feeling that. But imagine you've become disillusioned with the profession of teaching. What would you want? Would you want your colleagues and the public to be angry with you? Would you want people to feel disdain and think you were less than as a human being or as a professional? Boy, these teachers today, they're not like the teachers from the days gone by. They just don't seem to care. How does that sound? Doesn't sound very good, does it? I wouldn't want anyone saying that to you. I wouldn't want anyone saying that to any teacher, especially if they felt discouraged or disillusioned about the profession and what lies ahead for them. So why do we think that about students? Why do we think that's okay to think about students? Well, it's not. Maybe we can take some responsibility for recalibrating the level of engagement in what we do. And I'm not saying the lack of engagement is our fault per se, because it's not. It is what it is. But as the only adults in the room, isn't it incumbent upon us to at least take the lead and try to re-engage students in a meaningful way? Maybe ask them, hey, I'm noticing a lack of engagement. What's going on? Talk to me. Tell me what we need to do to kind of reignite that. See them, ask them, listen to them, empathize with them. Take a fresh look at everything you do and ask, is this still relevant? Is it still engaging? Is it still inviting? Does it spark curiosity? Is it relatively interesting? This is not a blame thing. This is not about saying it's teachers' fault or anything like that. It's a reaction thing. Maybe students are still in the COVID haze, or maybe they have lost the luster for school or the luster for life in general. Maybe. I don't know that to be true, but what I do know is that throwing up our hands and giving up is not an option. We have to do everything we can to re-engage students, to reignite their love of learning, or at the very least, reignite their level of self-respect where they fully invest in whatever it is they're expected to learn. If students truly don't care about school anymore, then the last thing they need is all of the adults in their lives secretly or overtly thinking that they are less than for feeling something one would expect to be completely normal after what we've all experienced over the past 2.5 years.
3, 2, 1.
Joining me this week is Eric Saibel. Eric has been a California public school educator for 25 years, 16 years as a high school Spanish teacher and assistant principal, 6 years as a middle school assistant principal and principal of a California Distinguished and ESEA National Distinguished School. He is currently the Director of Student Services of a K-8 district in Marin County, California. Eric also co-founded Global School Play Day in 2015, along with Scott and Tim Bedley, and that is going to be the focus of our conversation today. I'm really excited about that. Eric is also a contributing writer to Edutopia and EdWeek. So Eric, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
So great to be here, Tom. Really great to see you again. It's been a while since we last ran into each other.
Yeah, we were reminiscing before hitting record about my time, a couple of workshops I did in Marin County back in, I think, 2015. And we had met there. You were at the middle school, and you were a champion for grading reform and all of the work that we were talking about back then. And certainly been following you on social media. I know we've been connected that way, but haven't had a conversation in a long time. So really excited to reconnect with you and excited to have you on the podcast for sure. But and before we dig into getting into the conversation about Global School Play Day, tell us a little bit more. I gave some of the highlights, Eric, but tell us a little bit more about the journey of your career so far. Where did you start your teaching career? Some of the schools, the roles you've had, the positions you've had, the professional pathway. Highlight for us the journey so far.
Thank you. Absolutely. And just on behalf of the whole Global School Play Day team, super excited to be here to talk about this movement, this idea, and this growing reality around the world. Personally, I'm from a family of educators and public servants, both sides of the family. Mother's a teacher. One of my aunts was also a teacher. The other aunt, a speech language pathologist. So it's kind of in the blood. And I started as a Spanish teacher over here in Marin County 25 years ago, which is crazy to say. Then got really interested in kind of the bigger picture operation of a school site, honestly, really being interested in how I could feel more connected to colleagues, started to get into some sort of pseudo leadership roles, and then moved into an administrative role, assistant principal, also at a high school in Marin County. And I was there for 6.5 years. And then that was 16 years in, and it was kind of an inflection point. I felt like I had really learned everything that there kind of was to learn and do in high school. I had 2 young children of my own, second grade and preschool, who were attending my local district. And so I really liked what I saw there. I liked what I saw in terms of the culture of learning, what the kids were experiencing in terms of what I really felt was a holistic approach to learning. So I applied for a job there and became an assistant principal at the middle school. And that's when we met, actually. That was my first year there. Eventually, I became principal of that school. And I was there for 6 years total. And now I'm in my third year as director of student services for a K-8 school district, also in Marin County. And primarily my role oversees all of our special education programs, also English language learner support, wellness, health, safety, lots of other stuff. It's kind of the kitchen sink of jobs. But one thing that I still cherish and value, I still have very close connections across the 3 different school districts that I've worked in, and really working to amplify best ideas to benefit all kids, regardless of where they go to school.
It's a big job, Director of Student Services. It usually is one of those catch-alls, and special education, English language learners. It's a daunting task at times, and certainly a challenging role for sure. But one I know that you are up for. So right around the time that I was in Marin County, around 2014, 2015, you co-founded, along with Scott and Tim, as I mentioned in the intro, you co-founded Global School Play Day. So what is that? Tell us what that is, Eric. What is Global School Play Day?
Thank you. So, Global School Play Day at its core is a thought experiment. It simply says, what if we dedicate one school day? And around here, it's 180 days. Around the world, it could be a different combination of days. It could be more, it could be less. Regardless, what if we dedicate one day out of the school year to student-driven, student-chosen, unstructured play activities? What would happen? And the genesis of that came out of a TED Talk given by Dr. Peter Gray, who is at Boston College. And, I learned about that through a fellow colleague, administrator, who had attended a conference in San Francisco back in 2014, Integrated SF, and Dr. Gray was the keynote. And I didn't attend the conference, sadly, but I heard about it secondhand. And, Scott Bedley and I were connected via social media. So we were chatting back and forth about different topics. And so I just kind of mentioned this, like, hey, this sounds super interesting. And he kind of thought about it, talked with his brother, Tim. The two of them have an awesome podcast themselves called the Bedley Brothers. And it was from their conversation where sort of this idea came about. What if we dedicated one day out of the school year to unstructured play? And that was probably December-ish of 2014. And we said, hey, you know what? Let's pick a date. First Wednesday of February sounds good because there's no school testing, there's no holiday that we know of. It's kind of the midpoint of the school year, so a great time to sort of maybe do something different. We thought, and we put up a Twitter handle, got out the message on Facebook. It was really shoestring. And we thought, hey, we think if 1,000 kids participate, we're going to be so excited. And that first year, 2015, there was over 65,000 children that participated across 6 continents. And wow, we were stunned. And also it was this incredible insight into just how compelling an idea this is. Commonsensical in one way, but also contrarian to the pathway that we see education going in terms of more instruction, more testing, etc. So in a nutshell, it's just a simple question. What if you hand over those minutes of one school day to the kids? What'll happen?
You said first Wednesday in February?
That's exactly right.
Spoken like a true Californian. Do you understand, Eric, that in the rest of the country, that February, it's really cold?
Hey, listen.
So if you're wanting unstructured play, it's going to be stuffed inside as opposed to outside.
Well, you know what, Tom? The amazing thing is,
I'm just teasing.
No, but you're actually right on the money. One of the most magical things about watching the day emerge over the years, and I invite your guests to go search on Twitter or Instagram, the hashtag GSPD, and then the year 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, etc., to get a glimpse from all over the world, images of kids and staff at play. And we get kiddos in Australia and New Zealand, and it's summer down there, and they're on water slides. And then you get the kiddos up in Minnesota and further north, and they're out in the snow. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
And to date, I don't think cold temperatures have ever stopped anyone from participating.
I can't imagine they would, because if you're in Minnesota or Canada or wherever you are, you're used to it for sure. But I thought I'd give you a little teasing there about the February's fine. Yeah, in California it's fine, Eric.
Well,
all right,
that's deserved.
Yeah, it's fair enough. But you are in Northern California, so it's not like you're in San Diego or anything like that. So it does get cold up there.
That is where my friends Tim and Scott Bedley are from, and where they live and teach down in
There
Orange
you
County.
go.
So
there you go. So that explains it all. All right. So you mentioned Peter Gray's TEDx talk, The Decline of Play, and listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes for that TED talk as well on YouTube. Really, really good talk. But let's dig in a little bit here now. I think you've made the case for let's create a day of unstructured play. Let's make room for it. But the question would be why? What was the main message? What's the research telling us? What was Peter Gray's main message in that TED talk? And what was it about that resonated, that either the talk or the conference? What was it particularly that resonated with you, with Scott, with Tim? Like, what really caught your attention?
It's a really powerful TED talk, and for any educator or parent or any curious person listening right now, I highly recommend that you look it up on YouTube. The Decline of Play by Dr. Peter Gray. And he has other TED Talks too. I'd start with that one. And, he reflects on his own childhood and what life was like. After school wasn't going to a scheduled event or a structured activity. There was just freedom to roam and explore and discover. And that more and more as we see our children's lives scheduled and managed, that we see serious impacts to their health, to their well-being, to their capacity to be creative, to have agency, to be resilient. And I think that all we're seeing and learning on a national and global scale, not just from the pandemic, because we saw these things happening pre-pandemic as well. The U.S. Surgeon General declared a mental health crisis for adolescents in this country. And I would argue that that's probably the case too in a lot of other places around the world. So Dr. Gray's main point is that there, at some point, 50, 60 years ago, there was seemingly this sort of rupture in thinking and education that anything play or associated with play is somehow not pertinent to learning. Play is separate from learning. And that anything that is learning must be directed by an adult. That's official learning. And that things like recess, or lunch, those are that's the time you're not learning. Those are sort of like the rewards. And so it's a really compelling talk. And I think that it really gets to the heart of how is it that we are helping our children grow and develop in ways that biology demands. Because he also looks to the natural world and how all mammals grow and develop. Like lion kittens, we like watching videos of those on our social media feed. What are they doing? They're playing, they're wrestling. You know what? Our children are exactly the same. So really that's the premise, that's the foundation of it. And I'll say that I learned about it at a really interesting time in my life, which was moving from a high school setting where, you're working with young adults and a lot of kids that are on their way to college. And it's a little bit different. They still benefit from unstructured time. They still enjoy playing, but it presents a little differently. I had just started a job at a middle school where kids all day are running and jumping and playing before school, recess, lunch, after school. There's just a need for movement. There's a need to go out and just be free. So that hit me. And I know that it was also true for Tim and Scott, who are elementary school teachers. And to understand that we also have the power and the ability to create that time and space for kids at school in a safe environment where the kids would have supervision was something within our grasp that all of us can collectively enact, free of charge, no membership fees, no subscription to any curricula. So yeah, that really was the genesis.
Let me clarify. Is it the case that unstructured play satisfies something sort of primal in us, in that it is something physiological and it is our instinct to seek that out? And when we restrict that, we are in a different mindset, which will impact learning? Or is it that the unstructured play, I don't know if I'm framing this the right way, but does the unstructured play create something within us that is absent? Do you know where I'm trying to get at here? Like, is there, like, I'm looking at it from one of two ways. If we are not given the opportunity to have those unstructured moments and that unstructured play as young people, are we blocking something? Or does the unstructured play create something within us that allows us to be? I know it probably two sides of the same coin, but just drill down a little bit. What is it about that unstructured time that has an impact on student learning and student achievement?
I love that question, and absolutely, it's connected. To paraphrase Dr. Gray, play is the original learning methodology. Play is learning. Play is an expression of how mammals, and there's non-mammals too that also are out playing, how we learn, grow, and develop. And Dr. Andrew Huberman of Stanford on his podcast was recently really going deep on this idea of play, and that it's the most powerful portal to plasticity, neuroplasticity. And that is a direct quote. And that's not just true for children. It's also true across all ages. And so what play is that fundamental biological drive to connect, explore, take risks, learn where the danger is, learn who your community is, become confident, just the physical skills too, the gross fine motor, all that thing, lighting up the brain, and in so many different ways. So the benefits of it, again, are biological. And yes, I think that also too, for sure, it does also value add to any scenario. I would say in the educational context, which is of course where we're primarily focused, all being educators, we're making the argument that when you provide the time and space for unstructured play, children will learn more. Children will behave better. Children will have better relationships with each other. They'll learn how to resolve their conflicts. They'll become more creative because they're tapping into that deeply biological impetus to play, to explore. And again, there's plenty of different schools that have adopted play-based methodologies. And also too, let's look at the big tech giants right here in the Bay Area that set up their faculty lounges with ping pong tables and volleyball courts and all kinds of different recreational activities. That's not by accident. That's not for show. They want people to be relaxing and getting exercise and socializing with each other, across departments in new ways, creating connections. They get it. They're understanding this. And it's weird to me that schools are having to kind of play catch up on this.
You can see how restricting these opportunities for unstructured play, when you mention, behaviorally, if this is our instinct as human beings and we restrict those opportunities for young people, it's going to manifest, it's going to bubble over into class. They are going to seek those playful moments, those moments that are unstructured, even within the structured classroom. And that's where you get into the quote unquote poor behavior or the classroom management and teachers becoming frustrated with the way children are behaving. And yet it is their instinct, it's their physiological instinct. So you can see how that might manifest itself in a classroom. But some educators and, what I see, I start to look at this and I say, this is probably one of the unfortunate downsides of the standards movement, right? So on the upside, standards made it very crystal clear what it is we want students to learn and be able to do. And I think that's a very important evolution of education, not just around North America, but around the world. But one of the downsides is we can get into this mindset that if we're not, every second of the day is not dedicated to meeting one of the standards in the curriculum, then we are distracted or we're losing focus. And so some educators, and I would probably say this maybe even more so with families and parents, they're uncomfortable with this notion of unstructured play. They have this mindset that, like I said, every second matters and every second should be planned and purposefully executed. And yet, as you've made the case for, and Peter Gray's talk and all the research that is out there says that unstructured play, especially at an early age, as kids are developing in very early stages, is how students develop their self-regulatory skills. This is how kids become self-regulatory. The self-regulation of, for example, making up a game and making up your own rules and playing that game. So how do we change their minds? Like, how do we make the case? Those who are so adamant that every second needs to be accounted for, what are the ways that we can begin to help parents, families, even some educators understand, maybe lawmakers understand that this unstructured time is actually an important part of a child's development?
It's such a great question. First of all, educators are under tremendous pressure.
No doubt.
They have been. And actually, when I started my career a quarter century ago, there was talk in California about the teacher shortage. And we see it and hear about it now. And in my role, trying to hire people is incredibly challenging. Education has so much work to do in terms of the social investment. And I would say we're really at a teetering point here in the United States, which is really upsetting and troubling for all of us who see this as a fundamental part of our society and our democracy. So as you said, incredible pressure to support all children in progressing on the standards to be college ready. Even if, and there's a lot of renewed interest in the trades, which is great. But we want to make sure that all kids have options. We want to make sure that every kid can go to a four-year college once out of high school if they want to. That's huge pressure on educators. But at the same time, educators are also under immense pressure to ensure the wellness and well-being of every child. And now there's an increased awareness, thankfully, about it. It didn't take the pandemic to teach us that, but it definitely reinforced it. And so now there's also an investment in the wellness piece. In fact, here in California, our state superintendent of instruction, Tony Thurmond, announced an initiative to get 10,000 mental health workers in the schools, which I fully support. Now, but when it comes to this idea of play, now we could throw all the research, piles and piles of it, decades of it, TED Talk after TED Talk. But we know that, for human beings in general, the most effective way for them to really commit to something isn't hearing about it or reading something. It's doing it. It's experiencing it. It's seeing it with their own eyes. So there has to be some action before belief. And in the case of Global School Play Day, it's going to take those leaders. It's going to take those people out on the vanguard. It might be a classroom teacher that says, I love this idea and we're going to do this. Sometimes we've seen it be a school principal or superintendents who have jumped right on board and said, we're doing this as a district. Also, too, and I'm talking to all the parents out there, parents have been that change agent. They've been the ones to advocate to their school leadership, their district leadership, their school boards. They're the ones that have done the organizing behind the scenes to get this going. So what we see is this tremendous opportunity for schools to try it out and to learn from those educators around the world. And Global School Play Day has taken place in over 75 nations since 2015. That's a tremendous body of evidence to show that we should at least try this. Now, let me just real quick make a point. Now, when we launched Global School Play Day, I was an administrator at the middle school. And I didn't want to rule by decree and say we're all doing this all day, no matter what. It was an invitation, and we had some staff members jump right on board and get into it, and others that weren't necessarily so into it. Or instead of doing it on Wednesday, we're gonna have some time on a Friday. You know what? We're gonna build this as we go. Because ultimately what we want is for people to commit and believe in this. And it was year 6 that we finally got to that tipping point where we said, you know what, as a school, we can't make an argument that one classroom is going to do this all day and then the one down the hallway is going to do it for an hour. Because who does that affect? That affects the kids. And I'd say by extension, it affects us as a team of adults as well. So it took 6 years in the place where I was in charge to see that come full circle, for us to dedicate an entire day to unstructured play. And let me say this, for those folks that have concerns about, let's say, behavior issues or students being out of control or students getting bored and getting destructive, we had fewer disciplinary incidents on our all day of play. This was back in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, than a typical day in middle school. And middle school, it's it could happen. It can be a wild ride sometimes.
For sure.
Our day of unstructured play was kids were more plugged in and exhibiting positive behaviors than again on a normal school day. So again, I just want to emphasize, with all the pressures facing educators, we're making an argument that Global School Play Day, that an idea like this is a way to address the whole human being. It's a way to bring a school community together. And it's a way for the adults to take care of themselves too, because they also have a great time.
Yeah, you can see the residual effect for the educators as well. You brought up parents and families and being some of the strongest advocates for Global School Play Day. But I also want to talk a little bit about the other side. So let's finish up by talking about two things. First, I want to talk about families. And when you drill down to the issue with parents and families and maybe their perspective at home, do you think that there's a challenge for parents and families who are in the habit of overscheduling their kids, that they almost turn any ounce of free time into a structured time that is, you have to go to karate, and then you've got to go to piano lessons, and then you got to go to dance, or you got to go to volleyball, or you got to, we've got our kids so overscheduled. I'm wondering from your perspective, and as an educator, someone who is a parent himself, as a father, but also just from your perspective as an educator, why do you think that is? What is your theory, why do parents tend to at times, not, and again, not all of them, but why do parents and families tend to overschedule their kids? Like, what is the reason for that? And why are parents and families so uncomfortable with unstructured time at home, that opportunity to play at home or play outside, or to sort of get into what I'm suspecting you and I experienced when we were younger? What is it, do you think, that's getting in the way? What are the pressures? What are the mindsets? What do you think is happening there with families? We're going to talk about the schools in a minute, but let's talk about families. Why do you think that is? Why are they overscheduling their kids?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to point any fingers. I'll look in the mirror first and just reflect on, my own kids who,
Mhm.
whether it's sports or music or other activities, community-based activities, structured activities. Absolutely, they've been involved in that. I've coached them for some of that, and all of those things. And I know that my teammates, Tim and Scott, would also agree that if a kid is involved in youth soccer, if they're doing music, there's tremendous benefit to that. Kids are learning, they're expanding their capacity artistically, intellectually, physically, in doing those different things. They have tremendous value. And none of us is arguing that those things don't have value. The same thing with technology. We say Global School Play Day, put the tech aside. We believe in technology. It's how we met. We met via social media. It's how we have spread the word about this movement. So, but we say there's also a time and place for it. Mm-hmm. I think that parents and families are under tremendous pressure to support their children in their growth and development. I think that they want their kids to be positively plugged in to different opportunities. I don't think that everybody's thinking, hey, when I get my kid into rec soccer as a kindergartner, this is their pathway to college. I do feel that there are some elements in society, and maybe it's a byproduct of the nature of American life. At least that's where I can speak from, where there's so much emphasis on work. Europe has the 32-hour work week. They've got the 4-day work week. Here in the United States, we're continually driven by the jobs we do, the work we do. And part of getting our kids involved in activities is because parents aren't home to hang out with their kids. So part of it, again, sure, is, hey, we want our kids to be well-rounded. We want them to be successful. We want our kids to get to college, be able to make a living. There's also that element of, just taking care of them. But this is a key critical point because the youth sports piece, for example, I'll speak to that because I've seen that from the inside. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the equity gap is ever increasing. And this is something that is of such tremendous concern because, of course, in our society, there are tremendous inequities. We would see the wealth gap, widening over time instead of getting better. And in this area of play, in the drive to promote Global School Play Day, equity is at the core. Because what's one thing that we can guarantee at schools that all communities can't necessarily provide their children? That's a safe and structured environment in which to have this kind of experience. And just right here in the Bay Area, just a quick aside, there's a number of nonprofits that are all about helping promote play in communities of need, underserved communities that in the past have been affected by violence, by poverty. Right across the bridge from us in Richmond, California, is one nonprofit called Pogo Park, where they have transformed not just the park spaces, but even the green routes to get between the parks, the staffed programs that they have after school and during the summers for kids and adults. and a new complex that they're building with a community center alongside another beautiful park that's connected to kind of a greenway, they call it, an old historic iron triangle of Richmond. And I'm sharing that because who staffs that organization? The family members, the parents in that community, a community where it wasn't safe to send their kids out to go play after school or at night. Again, because of the circumstances, and they're turning that around in a very holistic kind of way. And they see what a tremendous impact that has on the development of the kids in the community who before had to be shut away inside. So back to the piece about structure, again, we're not arguing that any adult driven or structured activity is bad. We think they're great, but it's the balance of structure versus that freedom.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, you're right. The pressure that can either be self-inflicted or external on families, on kids. They see other kids that are playing sports year round, and all of those different pressures can really get to families. Let's finish up by talking about schools. We certainly know the importance of unstructured play in terms of developing self-regulation. We know that one day a year is not necessarily going to have that kind of impact. It certainly raises the awareness. It shows evidence of how important that is. You mentioned fewer discipline issues and more sort of social competence and pro-social behavior on that day. So if that's the case, then I would imagine that it would be wise for schools to consider, how do we make unstructured play or unstructured time a regular part of our school routine? So as far as schools are concerned, let's talk about, we know the why. So what are some of the most efficient and effective ways that you've seen schools bring unstructured time as a regular part of the schedule, a regular part of the week, a regular part of the month? What are some of the best models that you've seen out there?
I love that question. First of all, for anybody listening and never heard about Global School Play Day, or you've heard about it and you've never done it, start small. And we say it right on our website, globalschoolplayday.com, which is, we suggest doing all day, one day of the year. Again, it's a day to bring awareness. It's a day to bring awareness. Do we think that that's going to, turn the narrative around 180 degrees on one day? It won't by itself. But the ideas, right? And the things that happen from those ideas after that. Now that could be where we get to that real pivotal kind of switch in terms of not just around play, but around the whole mindset of a school and the way that education really creates the space for children. Is that space conducive for the most optimal learning, growth, and development experience or not? And right now we'd argue that we're not there yet. So start small. Start with an hour, start with 45 minutes. If you're in the secondary, hey, I'm talking to high school educators too. I'm talking to higher education folks as well. A class period is great. Have kids bring in games, music, just kind of back away and, let them be the drivers. And it's okay to do prep ahead of time, to communicate with the families, with the community, to set up norms. It's not like a free for all. We're not going to go up on the roofs here. We're going to maintain safety. We're going to,
of course,
we're going to, we're there. It's not some kind of, just sort of free for all. We do. Yeah. We're just like society, right? When you walk around society, there's rules there too. Yeah. Guess what? So start small. Yeah. Look at our website. Click on the link of past participants. See far and wide where people are participating. We got people in Africa, South America. We got people in Asia. We got people in Southern Europe, Northern Europe, Canada. We got people in the United States of America. We got people
everywhere,
all over the place. And let me say this, I'm going to give a shout out right now. Mary Hubbard Elementary School in New Jersey. You know what they did? They're not only doing Global School Play Day on the first Wednesday of February. They took an idea that we did in 2021. Let's make the first month of school, August 15th and September 15th, Global School Play Month. Let's start the year off strong. Let's be celebratory. Let's get back into this, with a big statement. Well, they took that into this year as well, and they had a global school play day within the last month. So that's what we're talking about, which is this isn't some one-off kind of weird day that's sort of like this kind of pause from business as usual. That's an example of an environment that is seeing the tremendous benefits, and they're saying, you know what, we can amplify this and we can incorporate it into our school calendar in a more significant kind of way. But again, start small. That's what happened with my middle school, Hall Middle School. And I was one of the people to come up with the idea. So it's okay to take baby steps at first.
Yeah. The research is robust. It's okay to not be familiar with the research, because as educators, we can't know everything about everything. And that's just, it has to be fine. But to pretend, whether in the community, stakeholders, et cetera, to pretend as if unstructured play is just a free for all. It'd probably be important to educate the students too, because we don't want them going to, what'd you do in school today? Nothing. And that would actually be true from their perspective. So we would actually want them to understand and that way they can monitor, they can self-regulate, they can understand how this is benefiting them as students, as people, in all of the work that they're doing in school, and also how they develop as a child into adolescence, et cetera. So, Eric, we've got 2 questions left as we finish up. These are questions I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. The first one, you can take this in any direction you want to, but the question is simply, educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
You know, this question, Tom, was incredibly easy for me to answer because this is my reality. I didn't have to dig deep for this one.
Right.
The fact that in education, we continue to have A through F, points-based, percentage-based grading practices that whittle and reduce learning down to a number and a percentage and a letter is completely unacceptable. And when you look at any practice in society that started in the year 1897, which is the case for the current iteration of 100-point scale A through F, Mount Holyoke College. There were examples that preceded that, but let's just put 1897 as a pin. What other practice around us, what other cultural element around us comes from 1897? So that question is the question that just completely burns me up from the inside out. I'm proud to say that not only Hall Middle School, where I was principal, but a number of other middle schools right here in Marin County and around the country are doing away with A through F scales and implementing standards-based learning practices. So that's what keeps me up at night. And I'm talking middle school, high school, and yes, even some elementary schools are using it. And you know what, Tom? I think we may need to come back for another podcast episode to talk just about that.
Hey, you're preaching to the choir here, Eric. I mean, that was one of the reasons I did the workshop in Marin County that time. And that could be whole nother conversation we have as we go along. All right, let's finish up here. Little on a lighter note, I love food. You live in the Bay Area, particularly you live specifically, I should say, you live in Corte Madera, California. So the question I want to know is, Eric, where's the best place to eat in Corte Madera? The best hidden gem, the hole in the wall, just that place that is local, where the food is tremendous, and it's that little secret that all the locals know.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely. And, I love this question too. Also a foodie here, and the Bay Area is a huge tableau of culinary, from hole in the walls to the 5 Michelin stars. But I'm going to take us just right over the bridge from Corte Madera over to my native East Bay. And in Berkeley, California is a Mexican restaurant called Picante, which has been there for decades. Is right down the street from where I grew up, and it's just wonderful food, just beautiful. Great. There's of everything, from burritos to manchamanteles is a chicken and sort of the drippy mole sauce. you know, they have great stuff there, you know, for kids, desserts. They got, you know, things for the adult crowd too, on the beverage end of things. And so,
Nice.
And then West Berkeley, tons of fun, right there on Gilman Avenue. Just a lot of fun things to go walk around and explore. So it's just a short jaunt from lovely Marin County over there. So next time anybody's over this way, head to Picante.
Picante. I certainly have. I love Berkeley. My ex-brother-in-law now played football at Cal, and I went to a Cal Stanford game back in 1980, and it was mesmerizing. I'd never been to any sporting event like that in my life, and it made me want to go to college and play sports, and it had me fall in love with Berkeley, and I'm still a low-key Cal Bears fan. I can't help myself. I think Berkeley is a spectacular setting. And now I've got two places in Berkeley where I can go to eat when I'm there. Listeners, you can follow Eric certainly on Twitter. The Twitter handle for Eric is at EC Saibel. The Instagram, the handle is at eSaibel. Eric is on LinkedIn. Also, www.ericsaibel.com is the website. Eric, any other places for Global School Play Day? Any other handles, websites you want to let listeners know about?
Absolutely. I appreciate it. So our website is www.globalschoolplayday.com. You can log on, read about how to participate. Click on links to show past participants. Click on the link for Dr. Gray's TED Talk, other press releases and media that we've gotten as well over the years. And just a great resource to kind of dive into. And also, too, most importantly, you can click on that link that says register now. You fill out a simple questionnaire free of charge, and you will sign up your classroom, school, or district for the next Global School Play Day, which is on February 1st of 2023. Also, too, we're on Twitter at GS Play Day, as well as Instagram, GS Play Day. I really encourage everyone to check us out, give us a follow. And also to connect with others. When you click on a link to show the past participants, you'll see they'll often share their Twitter handles, their school websites. Reach out to them, ask them how they did it. Hey, maybe it's somebody in your county, somebody in your state. Check them out.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Eric. Great to see you, my friend. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Again, on behalf of the whole team, thank you, Tom, for all your work. And we're just really excited to really expand the message. We just know that the kids and adults deserve it, and we'll hopefully see the numbers grow. Again, building momentum towards greater wellness and we'd argue deeper learning and better outcomes for all.
Fantastic. Well, truly having a global impact. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Great to see you.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
In Assessment Corner this week, I want to share a little of why I'm rethinking the widely held stance against group grades. Now, the widely held position about group grades is, of course, that an individual student's achievement level should be that of the individual student's achievement level, and that any individual influence from other group members, whether it be from members not carrying their weight or from the student being carried by the group or anything like that, all of those influences be factored out of grade determination. Now, my rethinking is not entirely new to me, but it is sourced and has been rekindled from two places, and it has me thinking that there might be a finite place for group results in an individual student's report, in whatever form that might take on. Now, I want to emphasize the finite part, as I'm not at all advocating that all student achievement be viewed through the lens of the collective. I still think, of individual achievement levels are important and disproportionately would form a part of a student's report. It'd be the most prominent part. But what I am saying is that there may be a finite place for collective results as part of an individual student's grade or level or performance. And I also want to say that what I'm about to say is a think aloud, so I do reserve the right to change my mind, okay? But here goes. First, my rethinking comes from the increasing emphasis on collaboration as an essential 21st century competency. That our students need to learn to be more collaborative as the world, so-called shrinks and becomes more interconnected. But collaboration doesn't occur in a vacuum in any sense, right? My ability to collaborate is not entirely independent of who I'm collaborating with, both socially and academically. Socially, of course, because even though we might think of collaboration as a kind of academic competency, especially when we think of collaborative problem solving, it really is a social interaction. And any social interaction is a back and forth. So my ability to engage socially with the group will be impacted by the group, and my social contributions will impact others in the group and their ability to collaborate in a social sense, right? It's the result of all of us, not just one of us. I also think it's an authentic experience to have a collaborative team responsible for collective results, right? Because sports teams experience this, dance teams, bands, etc. Yes, each person has to pull their weight, but the result is presented to the collective. You won or you lost as a team. I just think that piece is valuable for students to experience if they haven't. Not everyone plays on a team. Not everyone plays in the band. Not everyone dances or whatever. So giving them an experience where they are collectively responsible for the result is important. So the first source for me in rethinking this notion of group grades is the competency of collaboration. Now, the second source of my rethinking comes from Zaretta Hammond, who was on the podcast last June. One thing that really stood out for me in her book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, was her emphasis on using cultural archetypes. That rather than trying to address any and all specific cultures in the school, which would be nearly impossible when schools are increasingly diverse, her suggestion is that we use cultural archetypes as a way of guiding our culturally responsive work. Those cultural archetypes cut across a sort of, I think of them sort of as an X and Y axis, right? So if you say on the X axis, we go from one end to the other. We have cultures that honor the written tradition and those that honor the oral tradition. And along the Y axis, I suppose, we might say that there are cultures that emphasize the individual versus those cultures that honor and emphasize the collective. So if you think about how schools have been traditionally constructed and focused around assessment, you'll see that they tend to be drawn to the individual and the written tradition. That is certainly a very Eurocentric view of school, a very Eurocentric mindset. So it actually becomes quite easy to see how someone whose cultural lens leans toward the collective or toward the oral tradition might feel marginalized or even otherized within a school setting, because that's not the norm in terms of what we do. So when you use those cultural archetypes, you can offer a range of experiences, right? So there's the individual and the written tradition, the individual and the oral tradition, there's the collective and the written tradition, there's the collective and the oral tradition, right? So at least if we were to be mindful of those four combinations, I think we would stand a better chance of being more culturally responsive or culturally attentive or culturally expansive, or however you want to phrase that. So back to the notion of group grades. So then to honor the notion of the collective and cultures that emphasize contribution to the collective, that standing out as an individual is frowned upon, there may be some finite places in schools where the contribution is not just my individual contribution, but it is my contribution to the collective that leads to a singular collective outcome that we all have to own, regardless of our individual contribution or our individual prowess. Not everything, of course, but in some finite way, can we create the opportunity for this and to make it meaningful and to make it substantive? Can we have a space for group results and or quote-unquote group grades? I don't know. Maybe we can. Maybe it's within some group-based inquiry project or a problem-based project where we as a collective have to come up with a viable and plausible solution. Some kind of experience where you are truly a team that not only needs and relies on one another, but one where we all share the responsibility of the result. And again, I'm thinking of a very definitive and finite place with this. It's not a pendulum swing, because that's not helpful either. If we trade the individual for the collective, then we're just trading one for the other. So that's why I actually like to use the word culturally expansive as a way of being more expansive and inclusive, to kind of avoid this either-or proposition. Now, that collective result of the team could be presented in the written tradition, or I might just say something tangible to be less prescriptive, or it may be presented in the oral tradition, which could also include, telling the story behind the solution, or telling the story of what led to the group and how they came to consensus on what the most viable solution was, or something like that. Something where the group is truly accountable to the collective more than the individual. Trying to help students see that the whole notion of, well, I did my part, is not always the best way to approach a collective effort. It isn't just trying to stand in isolation and stand out and say, well, I did my thing and you didn't do yours. Yes, ideally, we would want every individual to contribute to the best of their ability, and maybe even equally. But I think when you are responsive to the collective, it's not so much about the individual parts as it is about the collective outcome, and that we all focus on how we get the job done. I don't know. I mean, maybe I change my mind tomorrow. I don't really think I will, though, because I'm of the mindset that we can be culturally expansive on the periphery and be superficially responsive, if you will. But until our responsiveness cuts to the core of their learning, and therefore cuts to the core of their assessment, I'll still think we have a long way to go. For me, the bigger picture is to always be willing to question my thoughts, question my perspective, or question my long-held beliefs. Like we talked a little bit about last week, I don't want my thoughts and my theories to become my identity. So I think we have to be willing to interrogate our ways of thinking to see if they still hold, or if an evolution in thinking is necessary. If we're never willing to reconsider our practices and be open to evolving, we will never grow and never deepen our understanding of how we can reshape our assessment practices to be as inclusive as possible.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, that's it for this week. Remember to follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Also, please email the podcast, tomschimmerpod@gmail.com, if you've got questions for Assessment Corner, or you have any suggestions or feedback for me about the podcast. And a reminder, check the show notes for the link for the Grading from the Inside Out training coming up in December. Next week, my guest will be Janine Letford. Janine is the author of 7 Gems of Intercultural Creativity, so that is going to be our focus for our conversation. Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts, of course, but a rating and review on any platform will help grow the podcast's reach. If you like what you hear, please keep spreading the word about the podcast to your friends, your colleagues, or on social media. I would really appreciate that. Have a great week, everyone.